The night air moved slowly through the old junkyard outside the colony city. Broken ships, rusted engines, and piles of metal covered the ground like a graveyard of machines. Dim yellow lights hung on tall poles, flickering softly in the cold. Wind. Most people never came here after dark. But one man still worked late every night. His name was Daniel Carter, a quiet human mechanic who repaired old starship engines. Daniel had once been a soldier in many wars across the galaxy, but those days were long behind him now. After seeing too much fighting, he chose a simple life fixing machines instead of breaking them. His small workshop sat in the middle of the junkyard, surrounded by old ship parts and silent metal giants. That night, Daniel wiped grease from his hands and turned off the large repair lamp above his work table. "Another long day," he muttered. Quietly to himself, he picked up his tool bag and walked toward the door, ready to go home. But just as he stepped outside, something made him stop. A sound, very small, very weak. At first he thought it was the wind moving through the broken metal, but then he heard it again, a soft crying sound. Daniel frowned and looked around the dark junkyard. "Hello?" he called out, his voice calm but curious. The junkyard answered only with silence and the distant hum of the city lights far away. He took a few steps forward, listening carefully. Then the sound came again, a tiny cry, almost like a child trying not to be heard. Daniel followed the sound slowly between two piles of broken ship wings. The metal pieces creaked under his boots as he walked deeper into the yard. The crying grew a little louder. It was coming from a pile of crushed cargo containers and damaged engine parts. Daniel knelt down and moved a heavy metal plate to the side. The crying stopped instantly. For a moment everything became quiet. Daniel waited, not wanting to scare whoever was hiding there. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." A small movement came from inside the dark pile of metal. Two glowing eyes appeared in the shadows. Then another pair, and another. Daniel's breath caught in his chest as he slowly moved another piece of scrap aside. 5 small creatures were hiding together in the darkness. They were not human. They were small fox-like alien children. Their soft fur was dusty and tangled, their long ears folded back in fear. Their thin bodies pressed close together as if they were trying to disappear. The smallest one let out a weak whimper and hid behind the others. Daniel felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. They were starving. Anyone could see it immediately. Their ribs showed through their fur, and their eyes looked tired and desperate. One slightly older fox girl stepped forward, even though her legs were shaking. She stood in front of the others protectively, trying to shield them from the strange human. Her small claws were raised, but they trembled badly. Daniel slowly sat down on the cold ground so he would not look big or threatening. "Hey there," he said gently. "I'm not your enemy." The fox girl stared at him carefully, studying his face as if she was trying to understand if he was telling the truth. Behind her, one of the little fox boys whispered weakly. "Hungry?" Daniel noticed an empty food container lying beside them. It had been scraped completely clean. They had eaten everything they could find. For a moment, Daniel closed his eyes, remembering children he had seen during the war on distant planets, lost, scared, and forgotten. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was already made. "Stay here," he said quietly, standing up slowly. "I'll bring food." The fox children watched him carefully as he walked back toward his workshop. But just as Daniel reached the door, something bright lit up the sky above the junkyard. A deep mechanical sound rolled across the clouds. Daniel looked up, his expression turning serious. A large black patrol ship slowly descended above the junkyard, its searchlights sweeping across the ground. Then a loud voice echoed through the cold night air from powerful speakers. "Attention citizens," the voice announced. 5 escaped alien fox cubs have been detected in this sector. All civilians must report their location immediately. Daniel's stomach tightened as he looked back toward the pile of metal where the small fox children were hiding. He could already see the fear in their glowing eyes from across the yard. One of them ran toward him suddenly, and grabbed the edge of his jacket with tiny shaking hands. The little fox girl looked up at him with desperate eyes and whispered only one word, "Please. Help." Above them, the patrol ship's searchlights grew brighter as they began scanning the junkyard more carefully. And in that moment, the quiet human mechanic realized something important. If he walked away now, those children would disappear forever. Daniel slowly looked back at the frightened fox cubs, then up at the ship hunting them, and the tired old soldier inside him woke up once more. The bright searchlights from the patrol ship moved slowly across the junkyard. Long white beams slid over broken engines, old metal plates, and piles of rusted ship parts. Daniel Carter stood very still near his workshop door, while the small fox girl held the edge of his jacket tightly. Her small hands were shaking. Behind her, the other 4 fox children were hiding together near the scrap pile, their glowing eyes wide with fear. Daniel looked up at the large ship in the sky. He had seen ships like that before during his soldier days. They did not come for friendly visits. They came to take what they wanted. The loud voice from the ship echoed again through the night air. "Attention citizens, report any sighting of the escaped alien cubs immediately." Daniel slowly looked down at the small fox girl. Her ears were flat against her head and her thin body trembled in the cold wind. She whispered again, very softly, "Please, don't tell them." For a moment Daniel said nothing. His mind was moving quickly. If he ignored them, the soldiers would search the junkyard and find the children anyway. But if he helped them, he could be in serious trouble. Helping escaped lab subjects was not a small crime in the colony. The searchlights moved closer, sweeping across the junkyard like giant eyes. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he made his choice. He gently removed the fox girl's small hand from his jacket and crouched down in front of her. "Listen carefully," he said quietly. "You and the others must stay very quiet." The fox girl nodded quickly. Daniel walked fast to his workshop and opened the side door. "Come inside," he whispered, waving his hand. The fox children hesitated for only a second before running toward him. Their small feet moved quickly across the metal ground. They rushed inside the workshop and hid behind a large repair table. Daniel closed the door softly and locked it. The searchlights outside passed over the roof of the building, but did not stop. Inside the workshop it was warm and quiet. Machines, tools, and half-repaired engines filled the room. The fox children looked around nervously, unsure if this place was safe. Daniel walked to a storage cabinet and opened it. He pulled out a box of emergency food packs he kept for long work nights. He placed 5 small bowls on the table and poured warm soup from a heating container. The smell of food quickly filled the room. The fox children stared at the bowls with wide eyes. Their stomachs growled loudly, but none of them moved. They were still afraid. Daniel stepped back and sat on a metal chair so he would not look threatening. "You can eat," he said gently. "No one will hurt you here." For a long moment nothing happened. Then the smallest fox boy slowly walked toward the table. But before he touched the food, the older fox girl stepped forward. She looked at Daniel carefully, studying his face again. Then she turned to the others and pushed the first bowl toward them. "Little ones first," she whispered softly. "The younger fox." Children quickly began eating. They ate fast but quietly, like they were used to hiding while they ate. Daniel watched them silently. He noticed how thin they were, how tired their small faces looked. They had clearly been running and hiding for many days after the smaller ones finished eating. The older fox girl finally took the last bowl for herself, but she only ate a little before placing the bowl down again. Daniel noticed immediately. "You should eat more," he said. "You need strength." The fox girl shook her head gently and pointed to the others. "They need more," she said softly. Daniel felt a strange tight feeling in his chest. Even while starving, she still protected the others first. He had seen soldiers with less courage than that. After the meal, the fox children slowly relaxed. A little, one of the small boys curled up beside a warm engine heater and fell asleep almost instantly. Another leaned against a pile of cloth near the wall, his eyes slowly closing. But the older fox girl stayed awake, watching Daniel carefully. "You saved us," she said quietly. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. "Maybe," he replied calmly, "but you still haven't told me something." The fox girl tilted her head slightly. "What?" she asked. Daniel looked toward the locked door of the workshop and then back at her. "Why are soldiers searching the entire colony for 5 small children?" For a moment the room became silent again. The fox girl looked down at the floor, her ears lowering slowly. "They want us back," she whispered. "Back where?" Daniel asked gently. The fox girl hesitated. Then she looked up at him again, fear returning to her eyes. "The lab," she said quietly. Daniel's expression slowly changed. "A government research lab searching the city for 5 escaped alien children." Was not a small problem outside. The loud patrol ship engine still rumbled through the night sky. Search teams were now entering the junkyard, their flashlights moving between the metal piles. Daniel stood up slowly and walked to the window. Through the dusty glass he could see armed officers walking closer to his workshop. Behind him the fox girl spoke again, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "If they find us, they will take us away again." Daniel looked at the soldiers outside, then back at the 5 tired fox children resting in his workshop, and the old soldier inside him began to wake up once more. The night inside the workshop became very quiet. Outside, the sound of soldiers moving through the junkyard slowly faded as the patrol team searched other buildings. Daniel Carter stood near the dusty window and watched the last flashlights disappear between the piles of broken ships. Only when the noise was gone did he relax his shoulders a little. Behind him the 5 fox children were resting in different corners of the workshop. The youngest 2 had already fallen asleep beside the warm engine heater, their small tails wrapped around their bodies like blankets. Another little boy slept on a pile of old cloth near the tool cabinet, breathing softly, but 2 of them were still awake, the older fox girl and the quiet boy who had spoken earlier. They both watched Daniel carefully, as if they were still unsure about him. Daniel walked back to the work table and sat down slowly. "You should sleep," he said gently. "You're safe here tonight." The older fox girl shook her head slowly. Her ears moved slightly as she listened to every sound outside. "We can't sleep too much," she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" he asked. The fox girl hesitated for a moment. Then she quietly walked closer to the table. "My name is Ayla," she said, pointing to herself. Then she pointed toward the sleeping cubs. "That is Milo, Kiri, Luna, and Sora." Daniel nodded slowly, trying to remember their names. "Well, Ayla," he said calmly, "you and your friends look like you haven't slept in days." I lowered her eyes for a moment. "We were running," she whispered. Daniel leaned back slightly. "From the lab?" he asked. Ayla nodded slowly. "They kept us in a white room," she explained quietly. "There were many machines, and many people watching us." Daniel listened carefully. "They asked many questions," Ayla continued, "and sometimes they tested things on us." Her small hands tightened slightly as she spoke. "Energy tests, mind tests, strange lights." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories about research labs during the war. Not all of them treated their subjects kindly. The quiet fox boy near the heater suddenly spoke again. "They said we are special," he said softly. Daniel looked at him. "Special how?" he asked. The boy lifted one small hand and pointed toward an empty metal cup sitting on the table. For a moment nothing happened. Then the cup slowly moved. It slid a few centimeters across the table without anyone touching it. Daniel sat up straight. Immediately, the fox boy quickly lowered his hand again and looked nervous. "We didn't mean to show," he said quickly. Daniel stared at the metal cup for a moment. Then he slowly looked back at the 2 fox children. "So that's why they want you," he said quietly. Ayla nodded again. "They said our family line has strong energy," she explained. But we don't understand it very well. Daniel rubbed his chin slowly, thinking. Children with rare energy abilities would be extremely valuable to governments or military groups. That meant the search outside would not stop. Easily, at that moment, one of the younger fox girls suddenly woke up with a frightened sound. She looked around quickly before spotting Ayla. "Ayla," she whispered nervously. The older fox girl immediately walked over and gently hugged her. "It's okay, Luna," she said softly. "We are safe right now." The little girl slowly calmed down and leaned against her sister. Daniel watched the moment quietly. The way Ayla protected the others reminded him of an older sister protecting her family during difficult times. He had seen soldiers do the same for their teams during battles. After a few minutes, the fox children slowly relaxed again. Daniel stood up and walked to a storage shelf. He pulled out several thick blankets and placed them near the heater. "Use these," he said simply. "They will keep you warm." The fox cubs looked surprised, but quickly wrapped themselves in the blankets. Soon the workshop became peaceful again. Soft breathing and quiet sleep filled the room, but Ayla remained awake, sitting beside the sleeping cubs like a guard. Daniel noticed this and walked over quietly. "You don't have to watch all night," he said gently. "I'll keep an eye on things." Ayla looked up at him carefully. "You already helped us," she replied softly. "You don't need more trouble." Daniel gave a small tired smile. "Kid," he said calmly, "I've had trouble most of my life. This is nothing new." For the first time that night, Ayla's ears lifted slightly. She studied the human mechanic for a long moment. Then she asked a quiet question. "Why did you help us?" Daniel looked toward the sleeping cubs, 5 small children who had nowhere else to go. He crossed his arms and answered simply, "Because someone should." Outside the workshop, the wind moved through the junkyard again. The search teams had left for now, but Daniel knew they would return soon. 5 rare alien cubs with strange powers would not be forgotten easily, and deep inside his mind, Daniel understood something important. Helping them tonight had only been the beginning, because if the galaxy wanted those children back badly enough, sooner or later, they would send something far more dangerous than a few local soldiers. Morning light slowly crept through the dusty windows of Daniel's workshop. The junkyard outside looked quiet and peaceful again, but Daniel knew that peace would not last long. He had slept only a few hours in his chair near the door, always ready in case soldiers returned during the night. When he opened his eyes, he noticed the workshop was warm and calm. The 5 fox children were still sleeping near the heater, wrapped in the thick blankets he had given them. Their small ears twitched sometimes as they dreamed, but they looked far more peaceful than the night before. Daniel stood up slowly so he would not wake them. He walked to the window and looked outside. The patrol ship was gone, and the search teams had left the junkyard, at least for now. But something inside him said they would return soon. A case like this would not be forgotten easily. Just as Daniel turned away from the window, he heard a small movement behind him. Ayla was awake, sitting quietly beside the younger cubs. She had probably been awake for a while, watching everything carefully. "You didn't sleep much," Daniel said gently. Ayla shook her head. "I needed to make sure they were safe," she replied softly. Daniel nodded. Understanding her responsibility as the oldest, he walked to the small cooking heater and began warming another pot of soup. Soon the smell of food slowly filled the workshop again. One by one, the fox cubs began waking up, stretching their small arms and ears. The youngest boy, Milo, rubbed his eyes and looked around the room nervously. "Are the soldiers gone?" he asked quietly. "For now," Daniel answered calmly. The children slowly gathered around the table while Daniel poured food into small bowls. But just as they began eating, a deep rumbling sound suddenly rolled through the sky again. Daniel froze. Knew that sound immediately. It was not a normal patrol ship. It was something bigger. He walked quickly to the window and looked up, far above the city. A massive dark ship slowly appeared through the clouds. It was much larger than the patrol ship from the night before. Its engines glowed bright blue as it moved into position above the colony. Ayla stepped beside Daniel and looked up too, her ears slowly lowered when she saw the ship. "That is not a police ship," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "No," he said quietly. "That is a military vessel." At that moment, loud emergency messages began playing across the city communication system. "Attention citizens," the broadcast voice said. "A high-priority search operation is now active. All civilians must remain in their homes. Government recovery teams are arriving shortly." Inside the workshop, the younger fox cubs began to look frightened again. "They found us," Luna whispered nervously. Daniel turned back toward them and raised a calm hand. "Relax," he said firmly. "They don't know you are here yet." But even as he spoke those words, heavy transport ships began landing near the junkyard entrance. Through the window, Daniel could see armored vehicles rolling slowly through the metal pathways between the scrap piles. This was not a small search team anymore. This was a full recovery operation. Ayla looked up at Daniel with worried eyes. "If they find us again, they will take us back to the lab," she said quietly. Daniel crossed his arms and thought carefully. His quiet mechanic life had suddenly become a battlefield again. He turned and walked toward a large metal cabinet in the corner of the workshop. Inside were many old tools, broken parts, and devices from his years as a military engineer. Ayla watched with curiosity as he pulled out a small handheld scanner and several strange mechanical tools. "You were a soldier," she said slowly. Daniel gave a small smile. "Engineer," he corrected. "But in war, engineers learn many useful tricks." Outside, the sound of armored boots echoed between the junkyard buildings. Soldiers were now moving closer to Daniel's workshop. Daniel walked quickly to the main control panel of his building. With a few fast button presses, several old defense systems hidden around the workshop quietly powered on. Metal shutters slowly slid over the windows. Extra locks sealed the doors, and small security cameras came to life across the yard outside. The Fox children stared at him with wide eyes. "You planned for this?" Milo asked, surprised. Daniel shrugged slightly. "Old habits," he said calmly. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed outside the workshop door. "This building is being searched," a soldier shouted. "Open the door immediately." The younger fox cubs quickly hid behind the repair table again, fear returning to their faces. Ayla stood beside them protectively. Daniel walked slowly toward the door, his face calm but serious. He pressed a small button on the wall and activated the outer speaker. "Workshop is closed today," he replied casually. "Come back tomorrow." Outside, the soldiers became silent for a moment. Then the voice returned, colder this time. "This is an official operation. Open the door now." Inside the workshop, Daniel looked back at the 5 frightened fox cubs. Their small eyes were fixed on him, full of fear and hope at the same time. For a long moment, the room stayed quiet. Then Daniel sighed softly and rolled his shoulders like a man preparing for hard work. "All right," he muttered under his breath. The quiet life was nice while it lasted. Outside, the soldiers began preparing equipment to break open the workshop door. And inside, the old human mechanic calmly picked up his tools, ready to defend 5 small alien children from an entire military recovery team. The heavy sound of metal tools hitting the workshop door echoed through the room. Outside, the soldiers were preparing to break the lock inside. The 5 fox children stayed close together behind the large repair table, their small bodies shaking with fear. Daniel Carter stood in the center of the workshop, holding a thick metal tool in one hand. While watching the door carefully, he had faced dangerous moments before during the war. But this situation felt different. This time he was not protecting a base or a mission. He was protecting 5 frightened children. Another loud bang hit the door. Dust fell from the ceiling as the lock frame began to bend. "Last warning," a soldier shouted from outside. "Open the door now." Daniel looked back toward the fox cubs. Ayla was holding the youngest girl, Luna, while Milo and Sora pressed close beside her, Kiri. The quiet boy with the strange energy ability looked nervous but focused. Daniel walked slowly toward them, kneeling down so he could speak at their level. "Listen carefully," he said in a calm voice. "No matter what happens, stay behind the table and do not run outside." The Fox children nodded quickly, but Ayla looked at him with worried eyes. "There are many soldiers," she said softly. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "I know," he replied. Another powerful hit slammed against the door. The metal lock finally cracked. The soldiers were about to enter, just before the door broke open. Completely, Ayla suddenly spoke again. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her, surprised by the sudden seriousness in her voice. "What is it?" he asked. Ayla hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust him with a secret. Then she spoke slowly. "The lab did not only study us," she said. "They studied our family." Daniel frowned slightly. "Your family?" he repeated. Ayla nodded. "Our parents were not normal citizens," she explained softly. "They were leaders of our people." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Leaders?" he asked. Ayla's ears lowered slightly as she spoke the next words. "Our mother is the queen of our world." For a moment Daniel stared at her in silence. "You're telling me you're royal children?" he asked carefully. Ayla nodded again. "When our planet was attacked years ago, our parents sent us away secretly," she said. "They believed we would be safer far from the war, but the transport ship was captured by human forces." Daniel's expression slowly darkened. "And the lab took you," he finished quietly. Ayla looked down at the floor. "Yes," she whispered. "They wanted to study the energy in our bloodline. They said royal fox families can control powerful energy fields." Kiri, the quiet boy, lifted his small hand again nervously. "The energy inside us is not fully awake yet," he added softly. "But the scientists believed it could become very strong when we grow older." Daniel exhaled slowly. That explained everything. 5 royal alien cubs with rare abilities would be worth more than entire star systems to some governments outside. The soldiers placed a cutting device on the workshop door. The metal began glowing red as it slowly melted. Daniel looked back at the children again. "So the galaxy is hunting you because of what you might become someday," he said quietly. Ayla nodded. "And because they believe we can become weapons," she replied sadly. The younger cubs looked confused by the conversation, but they could feel the tension in the room. Another loud crack sounded from the door as the metal panel finally began to fall inward. Daniel stood up slowly. "Well," he said calmly, "I've never liked people who treat children like weapons." Behind him, the door crashed open with a loud metallic scream. 5 armored soldiers rushed inside with rifles raised. "Hands where we can see them," the leader shouted immediately. Daniel slowly lifted his hands, but did not step away from the Fox children. The soldiers quickly spread across the workshop, scanning every corner. Then one of them spotted the Fox cubs behind the repair table. "Targets confirmed," the soldier announced through his helmet radio. 5 Fox cubs located. The younger Fox children pressed closer together in fear. Ayla stood in front of them protectively once again. The soldier leader stepped forward and looked at Daniel coldly. "You are interfering with a government recovery operation," he said. "Step aside immediately." Daniel looked at the frightened cubs behind him, then back at the soldiers. His calm voice carried a quiet warning. "You are not taking them," he said simply. The soldiers raised their weapons slightly higher. Clearly surprised by his answer, the leader narrowed his eyes. "Do you understand what you are doing?" he asked. Daniel slowly rolled his shoulders like a man preparing for a difficult job. "Oh, I understand perfectly," he replied calmly. "You want 5 scared children who just escaped a prison, and I'm the only person standing in your way." For a moment the room became silent, except for the soft hum of machines. Then the soldier leader gave a cold smile. "That makes this very simple," he said. But what the soldiers did not know was something very important. The quiet mechanic they were facing had spent 20 years building machines designed for war, and hidden around the workshop were tools and systems far more dangerous than they could imagine. The workshop became very quiet after the soldier leader spoke those cold words. 5 rifles were pointed toward Daniel Carter. Behind him, the fox cubs stayed close together, their small bodies shaking with fear. Ayla stood in front of the younger ones again, trying to protect them even though she was only a child herself. Daniel slowly looked at each soldier in the room, his expression calm and tired. He had seen moments like this many times during the war. The only difference now was that the people he was protecting were small children. The soldier leader took another step forward. "Move aside," he ordered. "We are taking the cubs back to the research facility." Daniel folded his arms and leaned slightly against a metal workbench. "They don't look like prisoners to me," he replied quietly. The soldiers did not laugh. Instead, 2 of them moved closer toward the repair table where the fox cubs were hiding. The youngest girl, Luna, clutched Ayla's arm tightly. "They are coming," she whispered in fear. Ayla tried to stay brave, but her ears trembled. The soldier leader raised his hand again toward Daniel. "Last chance," he warned. But Daniel did not move. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket and pressed a small hidden button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly the entire workshop lights shut off. The room dropped into darkness. Before the soldiers could react, loud metal doors slammed down over every window and exit. Heavy locks clicked into place. Emergency red lights switched on across the ceiling. The soldiers immediately raised their rifles and turned in every direction. "What did you do?" one of them shouted. Daniel stepped away from the workbench and walked slowly toward the center of the room. "Just closed the shop for the day," he answered calmly. The soldier leader quickly touched the control panel on his armor, trying to open the door again. But nothing happened. "Doors are locked," another soldier reported. Daniel nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. "They only open from my control system." The soldiers exchanged serious looks. This simple mechanic workshop had suddenly become a sealed bunker. The leader aimed his rifle directly at Daniel. "You are making a very bad decision," he said coldly. Daniel shrugged slightly. "I've made worse," he replied. Suddenly, a loud mechanical sound came from the walls. Small defense drones dropped from hidden panels near the ceiling. Each one had a bright scanning light and a small electric stun device. The soldiers immediately aimed their weapons upward. "Drones!" one of them shouted. Daniel raised his hand calmly. The drones began moving slowly around the room, watching every soldier carefully. "Relax," Daniel said. "They only attack if someone fires a weapon." The soldier leader stared at him with growing anger. "You built this place like a fortress," he said. Daniel nodded slightly. "Old engineer habit," he replied. Behind him, the fox cubs were watching everything with wide eyes. They had never seen anything like this before to them. Daniel had just transformed from a quiet mechanic into something much more dangerous. The soldier leader slowly lowered his rifle a little, thinking carefully. "You cannot hold us here forever," he said. "Our command ship is already outside the city. They will send more troops." Daniel crossed his arms again and leaned against the wall. "That might be true," he admitted calmly. "But for now, you're stuck in here with me." One of the younger soldiers suddenly moved his rifle slightly toward the repair table. The movement made one of the defense drones react instantly. A sharp electric blast shot from the drone and struck the soldier's weapon. The rifle sparked and shut down immediately. The soldier jumped back in surprise. Daniel shook his head slowly. "I told you," he said calmly. "No weapons." Behind the table, Milo whispered excitedly. "He protected us." Ayla watched Daniel carefully. Her eyes filled with something new, respect. At that moment, Kiri, the quiet fox boy, suddenly stepped forward. A little, his small hand lifted slowly again. The strange invisible force appeared once more. A metal tool on the workbench floated into the air and gently moved toward him. The soldiers stared in shock. That is what the lab wanted, one soldier muttered quietly. Daniel noticed the movement and looked back at Kiri. Easy, he said. Gently. You don't need to show them anything. Kiri lowered his hand again quickly, but the soldiers had already seen enough. The leader touched his helmet radio again. We have visual confirmation, he reported quietly. The Cubs possess active energy abilities. Daniel sighed softly when he heard that message. Now the situation had become even worse. The soldiers would never stop searching for them after seeing that, but something inside him had already made its decision long ago. He turned back toward the soldier leader and spoke calmly. You can tell your commanders whatever you want, he said, but those kids are not going back to a lab. Outside the workshop, heavy engines suddenly roared in the sky again. Through the roof vibrations, Daniel could tell that even larger ships were arriving above the colony. The situation was growing bigger every minute, and deep inside, the old war engineer knew something important. This small fight in a junkyard workshop was about to turn into a much larger battle that could change all of their lives forever. The workshop was filled with a tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the quiet breathing of the fox cubs. Outside, the sky had grown darker as massive transport ships hovered above the colony, their engines glowing like distant stars. Daniel Carter stood at the center of the room, calm and collected, though his muscles were tense and ready. The soldiers who had entered the workshop earlier remained frozen. Unsure how to act, they had seen strange energy-move objects, drones that could disable their weapons, and a human who seemed calm in the face of overwhelming odds. Ayla stood in front of her siblings, still alert, her ears twitching at every sound. Luna, Milo, Kiri, and Sora clung to each other, their small bodies trembling but safe for the moment. Daniel turned slowly to the Fox children, his voice gentle but firm. You've been through a lot, he said. You're tired, scared, and hungry. The children nodded quietly. But you're not alone anymore. Daniel continued, I'm here. Ayla's ears lifted slightly, a hint of hope appearing in her glowing eyes. Behind them, the soldiers whispered among themselves, realizing that this was not a simple recovery mission. One of the younger soldiers stepped forward nervously. What are they? He asked quietly. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he focused on the cubs, ensuring they were calm and ready. They are children, he finally said, his voice carrying authority. They are not weapons. The soldier leader's face darkened. They are assets, he replied coldly. Orders are orders. Daniel smiled faintly, shaking his head. Some orders aren't right, he said simply. The leader hesitated, realizing that this human mechanic was more than just a civilian. Suddenly, from the corner of the workshop, Kiri lifted his hand again. The small metal tools around the room began to float slowly into the air, spinning gently above the workbench. The soldiers' eyes widened, their rifles trembling slightly in their hands. Daniel stepped forward calmly. Easy, he said to Kiri. No need to scare them too much. But the message was clear. These children were not ordinary, and anyone who tried to harm them would face consequences. Ayla looked up at Daniel, her voice quiet but steady. Will they stop? She asked. Daniel shook his head slowly. Not yet, he admitted. But we can hold our ground. The soldiers began to retreat slightly, unsure how to proceed. At that moment, a bright light filled the windows of the workshop. All 5 fox cubs instinctively ducked, but Daniel stayed calm. A massive ship landed just outside the junkyard, its doors opening slowly. Through the opening, figures could be seen descending, tall, armored aliens with glowing insignia on their uniforms. Daniel's eyes widened slightly as recognition hit him. Visitors from their world, he muttered. Ayla's ears perked up, and her eyes shone brightly. They came for us, she whispered. The alien soldiers moved quickly, their steps precise and confident. The leader of the group, a tall figure with a flowing cloak and glowing eyes, stepped forward. Ayla gasped softly, recognizing the symbol on the cloak. It's our queen, she whispered in disbelief. The Queen looked at the human mechanic calmly, her eyes sharp and curious. "You protected my children," she said, her voice carrying authority. Daniel nodded slowly. They were hungry, scared, and alone. He said, "I couldn't let anyone take them." The Queen studied him for a long moment, then slowly lowered her head in respect. "You are brave," she said simply. "You are wise." Yayla's eyes widened, and the younger cubs stared in awe. The soldiers from the recovery team outside froze. Realizing they were no longer in control of the situation, the Queen moved closer, her presence commanding the room. "You will come with us," she said to Daniel. "To our world." Daniel's eyes flicked toward the fox cubs, then back to the Queen. He could feel the weight of the moment after all these years of war, of repairing ships and machines, of living quietly in the junkyard. He had never imagined that his life would change like this, but when he saw the small, glowing eyes of the fox children looking at him with trust and hope, he knew his answer immediately. "I will come," he said simply. The Queen nodded, satisfied. The soldiers from the recovery team slowly lowered their weapons. Realizing resistance was pointless, the fox children began to step out from behind the workbench, their small hands holding onto Daniel's as if he were their anchor. Ayla walked in front of them, proud and protective, but also filled with relief. The Queen smiled slightly, a rare and gentle expression. "From this day forward," she said softly, "your family is no longer alone." Daniel looked down at the children, then back at the Queen. A sense of peace and purpose filled his chest. The fox children clung to him, and he felt the responsibility and warmth of being their protector. Outside, the patrol ships had retreated, and the junkyard finally became quiet. For the first time in days, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. The galaxy had shifted around them, and a human mechanic who once repaired broken machines in a lonely junkyard now held the key to protecting 5 royal alien children. The Queen gestured for the fox children and Daniel to follow her toward the massive ship. Ayla looked back at him, smiling softly. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "You taught me bravery too," he replied quietly, and together, they stepped toward a new life among the stars. A life that would soon become a story told across the galaxy, of a human who protected the helpless, of 5 alien cubs who survived against impossible odds, and of a bond between worlds that no one could break.